Welcome back to English 101, week 3. This is our reading lecture, and we're going to talk about just a couple of things. And so this should be a fairly short video to get us into the readings for this week. So I think about 10 minutes for this one. All right, so we talked about these questions before when we first started reading the story Hills Like White Elephants. And I asked you, always when we're reading these stories, and these are just to get us started, so we're not analyzing literature so much like we might if this is an American literature class or English literature, something like that, or whatever. But we're just using this as a springboard into the story. But I want you to understand the characters. So character is one of the first things you want to think about. And as you read this next story, we're going to be looking at a story called Edison, New Jersey. So you can kind of guess maybe where the setting is. And you might not be able to see that picture all that well on the screen, but what those gentlemen are doing is it looks like they're putting together a really nice large pool table. And so that's something about the characters you'll notice as you get into reading Edison, New Jersey by Junot Diaz, that his two main characters that we see the most, and there's really one is the really most important character, but he is his job is to go out and deliver and put together pool tables, some other things too, but mostly really expensive pool tables, which I think he uses the word golden crown, maybe. I have to go back and look at the story again as we go through this next couple of weeks. So character is one thing you want to think about no matter what story we're reading. So take a look at this story, Edison, New Jersey, and see quickly if you can get into the characters a little bit. Much like with Hemingway, I think you're going to see that the story, like Hills Like White Elephants, there's a lot going on under the surface that may be a little bit like that iceberg method that sometimes people describe Hemingway's writing. In other words, the dialogue, the way the characters speak is just seems kind of everyday, as if nothing's really happening or nothing important, but maybe there's a lot going on at the surface. So I want you to try to look for that as you read this next story. The setting is going to be important. Setting, of course, involves place and time. So here we have New Jersey, Middlesex County, I think, is where Edison, New Jersey is. And so you can see that, East Coast. This is not a big map, so you can't really see that the Atlantic Ocean is right there. But at any rate, there it is. And in the 90s sometime, I think, because the story was published in the mid-90s in a short story collection by Junot Diaz. And so I'm guessing the story's set maybe late 80s, 90s, somewhere in there. We don't know for sure. It doesn't say, but maybe you can, as you read it, maybe there's some clues that tell us, but I'm guessing he doesn't really identify the year, but it seems like it would probably be in the 90s because the story was published in the mid-90s. So look for that as you go through. Language, of course, we talked about this before, the idea of concrete versus abstract. Is there metaphor? Things like similes, which are, when you make comparisons to things. What kinds of language does it seem like everyday language, or is it kind of very formal? How do people speak? Do they use swear words? Do they use slang? What's going on with the language? Not only the dialogue, the way they speak, but then also just the way the writer uses language. So those are character, setting, language, point of view. That's another one that we talked a little bit about before we started reading. So this is one of the things where, is it first person? In other words, is the writer saying, I did this, I went here, we went there, it was ours? Or is it second person? It's a little rare. Usually second person is not too common, where the story says, you did this, you went there. Or is it third person, where we're kind of removed a little bit? It's not so personal, I, and it's he. He went to the store, he went to the house, he delivered the pool table, she was there at the door to meet him, etc. Or, so look at this, try to get the point of view. This can get pretty complicated, point of view, but I think if you keep it at least understanding it's first person, it's the person is actually telling you the story from their point of view, or it's somebody talking about somebody else. And again, the second person is not too common, but it does come up. So you're probably going to be first or third person in most stories that we'll read. And then finally, the last thing is the themes. Are there certain kind of universal things that come up here? And I'm going to point you in that direction for this story a little bit to get you started thinking about the themes. So what I think is on the very first page of this story, and it's about an 8-page story, so it's a little longer than Hills Like White Elephants. but we get this comparison set up. Let's look at this just really quickly. If you can see this quote, this is from the first page of the story. And it's the first paragraph, in fact. The first time we tried to deliver the Golden Crown, that's one of those expensive pool tables. They're trying to deliver this. The lights are on in the house, but no one lets us in. I bang on the front door, and Wayne is his partner. They work together. Wayne usually drives the truck. Wayne hits the back, and I can hear our double drum shaking the windows. Right then, I have this feeling that someone inside is laughing at us. Now, maybe that's just sort of, okay, they're trying to deliver the pool table, and they bang on the front door, nobody lets them in. They've had a couple of attempts, we learn later, trying to get this pool table delivered to this particular house, and they're having trouble with it. And so and you might notice some of the things we talked about. I, right? So we know that the protagonist, the main character, is telling the story. This is in first person. That goes back to our point of view, right? You saw I. So this is a story that is being told, seems like. Now that can always switch, so you have to pay attention to that. Usually doesn't, but it can. So let's see if it goes through the story. We have the same narrator, the same voice. He's going to be our main character, but we do see this I, so you can see that. And then we talked a little bit about language use, like how it can be very concrete, just like this happened and that happened, and this looks pretty concrete, but is it? I wonder if it's just concrete. So they try to deliver the table. They're doing a job. It's hard work, doing this delivery work, going all over the city, probably a lot of traffic, kind of like Chicago. I don't know. Edison, maybe not so big, but I think it's close to New York. And then right then, I have this feeling that someone inside is laughing at us. So you could, again, I'm going to point you in the direction. One of the readings we're going to do this week is on economic inequality, or what we might call the haves and the have-nots. I don't know. I just, when I read that, I've read this story a few times because I've used it, for a couple of classes. And I wonder if that's not a symbol, man is a symbol using animal, right? We talked about earlier in our introductory lecture. So is it just, he just wonders if somebody inside, could inside and outside be those who have money, those who have power, those who don't? I don't know. So I'm sharing these two paragraphs to get you started thinking about the story, because again, it looks like a very simple story, but I believe there's a lot going on under the surface, just like that Hemingway story we read before, where the couple doesn't really say too much what they're thinking, but they are thinking a lot. And this is a smart guy, I believe, who's writing this story. Maybe it's even a little semi-autobiographical. Maybe it's Junot Diaz before he got to be a famous writer. Who knows? And here's another paragraph, a little further down the page near the bottom. He's talking about, he does this work. They drive all over New Jersey, New York, different places, and they deliver these pool tables, very expensive pool tables. And he says, you should see our customers, doctors, diplomats, surgeons, presidents of universities, ladies in slacks and silk tops who sport thin watches you could trade in for a car, who wear comfortable leather shoes. Most of them prepare for us by laying down a path of yesterday's Washington Post. So they read a newspaper. Again, this is in the 90s, so maybe there's some status even attached to what newspaper you read. The New York Times, the Washington Post. These are really publications that are kind of serious publications. So even that might be symbolic. But anyway, they do put a path down, which I think is kind of interesting. Somebody's delivering. They don't want them to get their nice carpeting or flooring dirty. But also this mention of all these, doctors, diplomats, surgeons, people who make a lot of money, who have power, influence, and so on. And so I think, again, on this first page, if you just isolate these two paragraphs, you can see how the author is setting up a comparison right on the first page. What's he comparing? Well, I think a lot of it's going to have to do with the way people make money, how money is exchanged, the whole economic system, and so on. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. You have to read it and decide what you think. Is there something else going on in the story? So for this week, I'd like you just to read the first 4 pages of Junot Diaz's story, Edison, New Jersey. And again, your summaries are not due until May, so don't worry about that. But the more you keep up with the summaries, the more it'll be easier at the end of the semester. But also with this one in particular, it's going to be a lot easier to write essay 3 and 4, because essay 3 and 4, I'm going to ask you to base it on, partly at least, on this short story, and we'll be kind of summarizing it again and then writing a response to that for essay 3 and 4. All right, let's keep going here. I have one more slide for you, or two. So the journal for week 3, I think this is, again, you can see why maybe our journal is a reading called Income Inequality, which I borrowed from the Opposing Viewpoints database, which we have access to through Morton College's library. Again, journals are also not due until May 6th, almost the last week of the semester, week 14, right at the end. And then this one is a fairly short article, and again, I think it ties in pretty well to our reading, Edison, New Jersey. Again, we're going to take 2 weeks, so next week I will be talking again a little bit more about Edison, New Jersey as we get into it, but I just wanted to get you started and get you started thinking about, is there something going on in this story that maybe relates to, we'll talk about it more when we get to the essay assignment, but that relates to economic inequality, that relates to motivation, that relates to, people who are working really hard trying to get ahead, et cetera, et cetera. So take a look at the story. If you want to read the whole thing, it's 8 pages. It's up to you, or you can just stick to the first 4 pages for this week. And then again, our journal for this week is Income Inequality. All of the readings, as always, these 2 as well, are going to be in the course content folder on Blackboard for week 3. So if you have any trouble finding those readings, let me know. If the links are problematic or anything, let me know. But otherwise, I will see you in the next lecture, or I'll see you in office hours. And if you have any questions, just send me an email or visit office hours. Thanks for watching this.